This is the Catch a Break podcast, the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating the entertainment industry. I'm Julie Harris Walker. You can find us at catchabreakpodcast.com and all the social media at catchabreakpod, as well as all the podcast places. The presenting sponsor of Season 3 of Catch a Break is Revolution Entertainment Services, bringing digital accounting and payroll solutions to the production community. You can find them at www.revolutiones.com. Catch a Break is also sponsored by Cachet. Cachet is proud to introduce Cachet Pay, the no-touch, all-digital, pays-you-back AP system that you've been waiting for. And finally, we are also sponsored by Orlando's Motion Picture Catering, who has been feeding Hollywood since 2015. In this season, we are going to be talking with different groupings of crew members. We want to do a deep dive on all the different positions and understand how they all work together. We're calling this first episode, How Does a Script Transition from Development to Production? And we're talking to producers. Physical production versus creative. What are the differences? Okay, here we go. We have our own Jessica Milanofi from the Catch a Break team, also founding partner of Catchlight Studios, and she's the producer of the upcoming films Plus Minus for Netflix and The Devil's Light for Lionsgate. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Julie.
And we also have Jeanette Volturno, who's a founder of Catch a Break and a founding partner of Catchlight Studios. And Jeanette has worked on over 85 feature films, most recently as producer on Songbird, the first film to shoot in Los Angeles during the COVID-19 lockdown, as well as executive producer on Uma for Sony Pictures and Sam Raimi. Hi, Jeanette.
Good morning.
And finally, Fanchon Cox, who you will remember guest hosted our last The Way Back episode. She's a producer and development executive at Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's Pearl Street Films. She's an actor and educator. She is the co-author of The Inclusion Writer and the co-host of the Sister Bunch podcast. Welcome back, Fanchon.
Thank you, Julie. I feel like we're becoming best friends.
I
know. It's good to be back.
Everyone gets to hear every conversation we have.
That's right. It is a different kind of best friendship, isn't it? It's a public one.
It's very public. So, as is our tradition, I'm going to ask each of you for your very first job and how did you get it? All right, Jeanette and Jessica, we've heard your first jobs. Now I think we're about onto your fourth job. But Jeanette, let's start with you.
It's so funny. I was thinking about that this morning. I can't remember what I said on the first time that we did this was one of my first jobs, but one of the first things that I remember doing was being a shadow for a producer on a music video called Colorblind that was completely written by teens and produced by teens. And I was the teen producer on that. And that's what really lit my fire to want to learn more and produce more. And so it was a full mentorship program that was just grassroots.
We haven't heard that one before. That's great.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Fanchon, what was your first job in the business and how did you get it?
Oh gosh, I think this counts because it certainly is the reason that I ended up in my current position. But I was an actor for a long time, moved out to LA to be an actor, but moved out here from New York because I was a theater actor, but I wanted to try film and TV. And I ended up writing and producing and performing in my one-woman show. So ironically doing theater out here in LA, which I should have been doing in New York. But really, I think that is where I learned a lot of the kind of hands-on things that I had read about in terms of how do you produce something. And there were so many parallels eventually with film and TV development and film and TV production. And we actually filmed the show after a year of performing it. And so then that was my first producing job, which was producing the show that I had written and performed. So yeah, kind of.
That's how you do it.
Sisters are doing it for themselves. Exactly. That's how it turned out.
That's awesome. Jess, how about you?
Well, I'll follow the theme and also go back in time. The first thing that I did production-wise was in high school. I was the stage manager for our high school theater company and had no idea how to do it. I just walked in and luckily there had been a line of amazing stage managers who'd come before me who had created this manual, and it was like this 4-inch thick binder that just had like step-by-step how to do everything. And I just followed the binder and kind of made up the rest, then added my makeup stuff to the binder and passed it along to the next person. And then went on and did the same thing, just helping out on theater productions in college as well, and just kind of learning on the fly.
Well, that's great. I love how everyone left behind their checklist for the next person.
Yeah, it was great. And we all we always had that lifeline you could call and be like, so what does this mean? And how did you do this? And, it was a good little community that we had working on a couple of shows there.
Now you're all called producers, but I want to differentiate a little bit because there's creative producers, there's line producers, there's about 100 different kinds of producers. So could you guys talk about, I think Jess and Fanchon, I think of you both as creative producers and Jeanette more of a line producer. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm more a physical producer.
Okay. Can you talk about the distinction a little bit?
So in my world, I lean more into the nuts and bolts of how to get things done. The actual how you start a company and apply for all of the rebates, put the budget and the schedule together, look at hiring people, track all of the costs through the show, work through all of the logistics of what you need, where you're going, how you deal with weather, all of that, and then through the delivery of the process.
So operation, business,
yep,
all of those pieces.
Yep.
Fanchon, how about you?
I am, yes, I kind of look for things from the seeds forward. So I do a lot of reading of, kind of what's on the New York Times bestseller list and what are the other books that author has written that nobody's read yet and hasn't bought the rights to, or attending a lot of festivals, obviously now online, and trying to find new people who are, or people who've been here a long time but didn't have the connections to get involved in the business and have a really good story, and especially a story that involves people that we haven't seen before in film and TV. So kind of trying to find them and help them figure out how to get the story in a good place for people like Jeanette, where it's practical to actually make, the story that they want to tell, but also keeping track of what the industry is buying right now and kind of helping to shape and mold that story so that we can get it pitched and sold.
And Jess, how about you?
I'm a little bit of a hybrid because I do a lot of the development stuff that Fanchon's talking about, a lot of original ideas, and really working closely with writers, trying to find the right home for a project, whether that's a studio or an independent financier, putting that kind of the legal together on that and optioning material. And then working really closely with Jeanette and the production team to be on set and really kind of be that creative liaison between production and the story that we're trying to tell, and make sure that both sides are getting what they need. So I'm usually on set for the whole production, or at least watching dailies if I'm not physically there, and then working all the way through post-production as well, because you kind of make the movie 3 times as a producer in my capacity. You develop one thing and that's great, but then you actually think about how you're going to implement it on the day, and that's a totally different movie sometimes. And then you get into post and you're like, okay, here's what we actually shot. Now, how do we remake the story again? And so that's where it's really fun for me to kind of go through all the different stages and reinvent the project and really find what ultimately it needs to be.
And I'll just admit that I came on here today to learn from these two, because they are very much both doing the things that I want to be doing eventually, right? And I love the development process, and especially getting to know kind of emerging storytellers. But my goal has always been to kind of be part of the entire process, especially because then you help protect the original story of that storyteller if you can kind of be there throughout the process. So I'm here in a learning position.
It's really true that I think that's what I'm excited to talk about with you guys is it's making sure that as you are building that story, and we all spend so much time, sometimes years, developing one of these projects, and then you get faced with the realities of implementing it. And a lot of times it can be really frustrating to watch as kind of that vision that you had, and you've already seen the movie in your head and you see it kind of being pulled away from you a little bit. And so I think what's amazing to me when you're with the right production team is that you don't have to feel that it's kind of being pulled away. It becomes this creative dialogue about, okay, so we can't do this, but how do we do this instead to make the exact same, thematic beat land in an even more effective way with the constraints that we have? I think that's a fun dialogue.
So it sounds like you fall in love and have your heart broken every other minute.
Over and over again.
Well, I was going to say something really interesting about working with kind of younger or emerging storytellers is similar to the story I shared about my first job, which is they are used to doing everything, right? So like a YouTube creator has done everything from the seedlings of the project all the way through their own post-production and distribution. And so sometimes it's really hard to help them see their way through the process of pitching it to a studio or pitching it even to independent production companies, because then we run into, you got to make these changes. And like, well, I didn't have to make the changes when I was going to put it on YouTube, so yeah, it is a different beast.
Even just kind of teaching them some of the, unfortunately, like the politics are a big part of the job, right? When you're working on a studio movie, and, teaching younger filmmakers why it's in their best interest to get the studio on their side, right? And how to communicate with the studio properly, and even how to communicate with department heads. A lot of people are just working with their friends. And so the first time they're actually hiring department heads, making sure that they understand what they need to bring to the conversation and what their expectations are, all that kind of expectation setting is super important.
Yeah.
Okay. Could we dispel a couple myths just from the get-go here? I know one for sure, like, if you're a producer, that means you use all your own money and pay for the thing, right?
Oh, no.
In fact, you don't even do that when you work for two powerful white men. This is part of the dilemma. Is for us, certainly, we're not a funding production company. We're a name production company, which does still mean something in the industry, right? Like, and I think that's what Jess is referring to, also around like playing the politics, because maybe having that name is going to be the thing that can get it financed. And yet you think having that name is just immediate money. And I can never offer that. And it drives me crazy. I'm like, I'd love to just finance it. But no, this is just another step. It's like having these names involved. Now we got to go get money.
But that's how, when you do go to get money, and that's a different kind of producer, even from what we are, like that is how you put the package together. Like Fanchon's saying, like, do you have a name attached as a producer? Do you have a name attached as a director? Or is it about getting casting? Or do you just have such a cool high concept idea that a financier is willing to give you a certain amount of money just based on that? And that's where you have to make the math kind of work in terms of what you're asking for and who you think your audience is for something.
That's where I come in.
Yes, exactly.
So let's start with, what's the process of, you find a story that you love? And I think from the outside, you might think, oh, you just buy a script and then you go into production. But there's a whole process that happens between love a story and green light. Let's talk about what happens in there.
Process and years and years and years sometimes. And sometimes, folks telling you to give it up, and you believe in it so much and believe in the filmmaker that you kind of stick with it or not. And then sometimes, unfortunately, you also say, okay, I've got to, be realistic. But the development process is everything from getting the writing up to speed, but sometimes that's there, and the production elements, like thinking, which is why it's so helpful for creative producers to have done physical production, because you can think about what really is realistic and what's the budget for this. Like, you've got to, if it's a 2-person piece, but it's a period piece, there are all these considerations. And so I think it's more just kind of like both pushing the storyteller to be able to tell the full story they want to tell, but also kind of walking that line of how to get it sold. And then for some reason, and maybe you two can help me understand this, it then just takes like 50 years to get it done.
Forever.
And the attorneys are part of that. We will say that. They tend to be the ones that make it take long. But yeah, it just takes even the things where you're like, this is a no-brainer, this is going to get sold. It can take forever.
Yeah, there's something, I think, like, you really have to push every project forward as hard as you possibly can, because nobody treats your movies like they're their baby. It's always you having to, I think, push the process forward until you hit a certain point where it just kind of like something catches and it kind of becomes a moving train. But up front, definitely, if you aren't, I don't want to say hounding, because I think you have to walk that line of treating everyone with respect and making sure that you understand the other priorities on their plate. But if you aren't staying present on your projects, I think this is a mistake that a lot of representation makes is if you have an agent who just sells a spec to a studio and doesn't have a producer who's there to be the advocate for that project, very rarely do you see those movies get made. You really need someone who's there on a daily basis saying, okay, here's our next step and here's how we're going to achieve that step and here's what we need to do. And I think in this development process, it's basically like forming your case for this project, whatever that means. Sometimes it's like putting money into biz dev and character design and a lookbook. And, if you don't already have a filmmaker who's a writer director, finding that director who has a vision for this and really honing that vision, working then with the writer to make sure that vision is reflected on the page if it needs to be changed. And then same thing right now we're going through with cast members who have input on the script as well as we're in development. And sometimes that kind of happens concurrently with the production conversation, but sometimes it's also getting your script in the place where everybody sees the same darling that you see before you start taking it out to the town.
And then you'll call Jeanette at some point and be like, okay, we have this beautiful vision. Can we do it? What is it going to take?
Well, Jeanette's my first call. Like, I don't want to wait until I'm ready to go on something. I'm lucky enough to have a partner here who can weigh in. Like, when I first read a script, the first thing I do is pitch it to Jeanette and say, okay, bear with me. It takes place on an island. It's got kids. It's at night. There's rain. I know we can't do that at our budget level, but let's talk about it, Jeanette. How can we figure it out? And that's the fun of having somebody in the trenches with you. Sometimes the answer is like, there's no way to get the math to work on this. And sometimes it's, hey, what if we thought about it really creative and we could figure out a stylized way to do it that's not literal rain and kids at night, but we could shoot it on a stage or we can build this or, and that's where you get into the cool creative conversation.
We learned very early on at Blumhouse when we were working together, and the train was just one project after the next project after the next project, that unless we started speaking right at the very beginning, we would have massive problems and cause delays with stuff when we got to the point of green lighting and in production. So what we do is we'll pitch things back and forth. She'll tell me the story, and I try never to say no about something, but I try to educate. So if you have this element, kids, then you're looking at, this many hours on set, and that means you have to add more days and you have to whatever. So does the kid have to be in every single scene? Can we use, this technique? Can we do this? Like, we'll pitch things back and forth, and 9 times out of 10, it actually makes a better story because you're really thinking about each scene and you're really thinking about, do I need to build an entire room? Do I need to look 360? Do I need to have X, 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 and X, right? Is the fire this large? Does the car flip do this? Like, how can we still see these beats or understand that these are happening through a visual media and still do it within the time and budget constraints that we have?
Yeah, we were just talking about a project earlier this week where there was a big car crash in the middle of it. And it was like, okay, well, the whole point of here is just to say that the actresses or the character's world has gone awry. Can we do that in a way that doesn't involve any cars and any stunts? And we really came up with something that the director pitched that is kind of more perfect for the world than a car crash, and obviously is way easier to achieve.
I love that too, because because I focus so much kind of on the kind of textual stage of the writing of it, but economy of words is always useful. And that it's such a good point where if you get, someone like Jeanette involved, a line producer involved early on, that can help even just in fleshing out the story itself, not even, in terms of production. And I was going to say another thing that is so important to start right away as early as possible. And we're doing a better and better job at Pearl Street, and we can always absolutely improve in it, is bringing the inclusion writer in right away. So in the same ways that you're already thinking about physical production, we're also saying from the earliest stages, from the seedling of the idea, you're thinking about inclusion and how you write characters in the script and, kind of how we're going to package. And I got a pitch recently of this wonderful story that I love. And there's a character, and so we're working on the pitch deck together, and there's a character of a sassy woman. And of course she's Black. And I'm like, let's make some of these other characters, bucket list. So in a pitch deck, you often, for the visuals, you include actors that are known as kind of your bucket list actors that you have. And so I'm constantly looking at pitch decks and saying, why did you choose these particular faces for these particular roles? And how can we push against stereotypes? And that then informs their writing. As they think about that more, then they go back to the writing of the script and think about, why did I have to make this a sassy Black woman, right? Like, can I change this? So.
Well, you make a really good point, because all of those choices in the creative have a ramification on the set dressing, on the location, on the costumes, on all of those pieces.
Yeah. And you're right. Once it's kind of cemented in there in those lookbooks, people get very narrow in their thinking about how you're looking for those roles. And those lookbooks are passed on to casting directors who are building their lists. So we have a project right now that's a rom-com where there are 2 male leads, and the actress that had already come on the project is a white woman. And so we're trying to be diverse in both of the romantic leads. But it became very specific that one was going to be Black and one was going to be Latinx. And the director stopped us and said, guys, no, we're going to cast a diverse person who's right for either role. We don't have to be specific on one or the other, but they can be, anything that fits in there that gives us the impression of what our world actually looks like.
I love it. If I can just say on that point, because a lot of what has happened when we're pushing the inclusion writer is people are like, okay, just throw in that it's a Black person in the script. Just put that it's, it's like, that's tokenizing. That's not what we're asking for. If you're going to say, first of all, if you're going to characterize, people by their race, then you've also got to say who's white. Right. So often what happens is like, oh, you named this person as Black, but this character doesn't have a race. Do we have to presume that person is white? Right. Then say it. Like a white woman is
generic people.
Exactly. Or, right, if in most cases, this script does not have to do with race, then don't say the race of the person. And then, yes, cast, but now with your biases in mind, right? With understanding your tendency is to cast a white male in anything that isn't specific. Now just have that bias, in mind and cast differently. It's a really important thing to think about. And I just want to say back, well, actually, I want to ask you both on the lookbook, do you have a certain length of lookbook? Like if someone brings you a 30-page lookbook, how do you respond to that? And what elements do you want to see in a lookbook? I'm just curious how other people go about this.
I think there's a whole range because it really depends on the project and how whether it's a director's lookbook or a filmmaker, writer director's lookbook. Like I have one lookbook right now for this project that's really, really long, but the movie actually needs some tonal explaining before you get into the script. And so having the longer lookbook that's very kind of impressionistic and, gives you a sense of the hazy quality that is present in the script is super effective. Versus like when I've had directors who I'm preparing to come in and pitch on a project, it's like, no, have a page about, the look of it, have a page about, costume design, have a page about camera technique, have a page about like a director's statement, have a page about, and be really succinct about it. So I think it depends on the purpose. I think in everything that we do, right, you have to be conscious of the fact that we're all bad readers. And so the more you give somebody to read, the less likely they are to actually look at your project. It's what you're up against. You're trying to convey as much information as possible.
Our world is very ADD, everybody in the entertainment industry. So when I look at things, I try to 10 pages or less. Yeah. If you're not getting it across in 10 pages or less with all of the stuff that you're wanting to convey in there, then, you're going to lose interest with the person.
Yeah, it breaks my heart when someone wants to send me a script and I have to say, could you just send me a pitch deck or a lookbook for, but it also, then I'm going to get to it a lot sooner than I would have if I was just going to read the script. So in my case, I'm sending it up the flagpole. I never heard that expression before, but now this is Hollywood speak, apparently.
How we talk.
I was like, okay. And because I don't get to decide if we're going to get a shopping agreement on this project, right? I have to get permission for it. And I'm asking 2 people who are, who have, a year's worth of projects lined up for them. And so it's like, how do I make sure that they're going to get it as quickly as possible? But as Jess said, there's also, it just depends, right? Because then once I get the yes, and I can create a shopping agreement with that creator, and now we start to develop it to like take it to a production company. By the way, I'm gonna be in touch with y'all because I feel like we've why have we not already not done something together? But right. So now I'm taking it to a Jeanette, and I'm like, okay, there need to be some more details here so that Jeanette can come back to us and say what's practical or not. So it's not only the kind of what the initial materials look like, but the flexibility to change them as you know, depending on who you're taking them to.
Totally.
I have, like, on my weekend read, I have anywhere from 3 to 15 projects that I'm supposed to read every weekend. And they're at varying levels. So if it's a fast read just to get an idea of the story, then I can get through that pretty quickly. If it's like a more complicated one where I'm actually breaking stuff down, I write on the front of the script page. I physically have to print it out and write on the front of the script page because there's something that connects my neural brains to like figuring it out. And I will write my questions and my notes and my thoughts of how to do something or why we're doing something. Because when a writer writes one sentence in there, that could mean 3 days of shooting in that one sentence.
Yes.
And so I get, oh my God, I get fixated on that. What does that really mean? Oh my God, how are we going to do that? You know, is there another way or whatever? And so then when we come back after weekend read and we're talking about certain things, we can have these thought-provoking conversations of, is that what they really meant? Is that what you really want to see? Is that what we're going for? What do you mean? You know, that whole thing.
Production is very literal. Like if you have in a script that you need to go to this location, like production will go and find that location. And then it's like, it's on me as a producer to be like, no. It doesn't actually have to be a castle in the Swiss Alps. Like, you know, it's literally like we need a room where she's going to go and like do what, you know, you can really easily adjust things in the script that are so meaningful for production. And so having, you know, a writer who can go through with that eye is super helpful. We can flag things for them of like, here are the things that are thrown in there inconsequentially, like in the same way that I think some of those racial indicators are thrown in there inconsequentially.
Totally.
You know, you do the same thing through production.
And production is trained to just give you your vision as elaborately as possible. Yeah. My favorite example of that is in Romeo and Juliet. They fight.
Yeah.
Right? That scene's either 20 minutes long or 10 seconds. Who knows?
Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so once you get to the point of you have your script, you have your budget, you have the package all together, you're ready to go, you have the green light, someone has written a check. What is your first phone call? I think, Jeanette, what is your first phone call? And then Jess and Fanchon, how long are you going to stay involved? Like, are you going to be in on every hire? At what level? At what point are you like, okay, you've got it? Or are you there the whole time?
You know, you get the business part of it set up with like the company and the bank accounts and the insurance and all of that stuff. And then you go for who are your creatives? Who are the people that are mind melding with the director that you want to surround the director with? Your director of photography, your costume designer, your production designer, your editor. Like you're getting in your keys to be able to, sometimes it's visual effects, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's special effects, sometimes it's a makeup artist. It depends on what the script is and what the project is. And so you're pulling those people together and are interviewing them in a way to say like, do we all have the same vision? Do we all want to collaborate together? Do we all want to work and make this something that we can be proud of? And for us, you know, we work a lot in the lower budget space, and it's a chance for us to be able to hire people who are seconds to become department heads. And that's where we can really make a difference, because in order to expand the work pool and the ability of bringing people up through the system, you have to give people a shot. And on the lower budget projects, that's a place where you can really make that difference. And so we consistently look for who was somebody that we worked with on our past project that would make a great lead on this project, because everybody goes to the top people, but why, you know, they've only got so many spots that they can do per year. Yes. And the ability to open those doors and find collaborative people who want to work on your project, who are going to bring that passion because it's like their shot, you know, that's what we're looking for.
I love that.
I think that's one of the challenges as you're working in different locations too. You know, when you're going to a rebate state, for example, there's so many demands on the crew pool there that's local that sometimes, you know, the people who are diverse in this moment for, you know, luckily are getting scooped up and employed, and everyone is chasing those names so they can add diversity to their crew list. But for another another show that's coming in that's a smaller show, or that, is late to the game coming in last minute, you may only have, 5 or 10 distant hires that you can bring in from outside of that crew base. And so what Jeanette's talking about in terms of finding those people that you can promote and bring up who, especially if they are diverse, and you can, start building the ranks, even if it's, not hiring just focus on the department heads, but hiring somebody who is the second, and getting them that training and getting them onto a bigger project than they've done before. All of those things of building the ranks are super important.
Awesome. Yeah. In my case, I do tend to it is definitely an executive producer type thing where I do in kind of negotiating the contracts, especially with specific projects like that are about, Black or Indigenous women, I'm like, I want to have some creative say in what this eventually looks like. But really once they go into production, I'm like, bye-bye, because I'm going to go spend this time on the next person or the next story that needs to get to this place. And then, but I certainly on the projects where I do have some say, I stay on, especially as kind of a watchdog, to make sure that where we have some say in the hiring, that it is inclusive. But yeah, it's always been, especially because I started off with that very privileged ability to tell my own story. I knew from doing that from One Drop that this is the fucking key. If you can tell your own goddamn story and not be limited to what Hollywood tells you your story is, or, these limited categories of what mixedness is or Blackness is or womanhood is, and you can tell your own story, then you get to also have say as things go along in these, in this three story approach to filmmaking. So I like to stay in the position of, once it's going into production, you go off and then I'm going to go back and help another person tell their own story. I'm really lucky, I know, in that sense, that's what I get to do.
I love awesome. That you're living in the future too. You're always on to the next great thing.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
I do stay involved all the way through. And I tend to take a little bit of a step back at the beginning of production and make sure that the director and the department heads are kind of all putting their plan in place. But it's really important that I just kind of keep checking in on everything and constantly just doing kind of casual check-ins where hey, how's it going? And we have weekly calls usually with the director and the production team, because you want to be able to anticipate problems. If you start to see there's a little bit of a wrinkle over here that may develop into something I need to see on top of that. Or, if you get to a place where somebody just doesn't seem to be delivering exactly what the director needs, and it's a conversation with the production team of well, can we support the department head or the department more? Do they need more resources? Do they need an additional, body or somebody who can help them do, a buyer or somebody who can help them get ahead of the workload that's on their plate? Or, how do we try and problem solve those things before you get to the day of shooting and things aren't where they need to be? Because it's so much easier, obviously, to fix things in prep than once you get on the day or you're in post and you're trying to figure out, well, we didn't have the resource that we needed. And if only, we were trying to stay on our budget, but if we'd spent this little bit of money earlier on out of the contingency, we would have had, ripple effects that would have made the project better. I think that's where, even for me, what a lot of producers, in my impression, is that they kind of neglect is where you are in terms of cost reports. How much savings do you have as you're going through versus how much of an overage have you already hit? Because then you can go back through and you can make sure that any money that you have to spend, you're putting on screen in production where you really need it, or in prep where you really need it, rather than having savings afterwards to go off and do additional photography, which is way more expensive than just doing it right the first time.
Which is, again, how we pass that back and forth, that information back and forth. Because we'll sit there and Jess will be like, can I buy an hour of overtime tonight? I really want to finish this scene, and we'll be able to have that conversation because I know the logistics intimately enough to be able to say, yes, we squirreled away some savings last week because blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So yes, you can do that. But I find that when I get past through the development department and I pass into the production side of things, once I get the production up and running, my hat switches again and it turns into more of a therapist. And I become the therapist on set to the crew, to the department heads, to the creative, to try and figure out and balance the expectations, the wants, the needs, the challenges, And then, all of the things that just sort of happen in production that you have to balance and manage to be able to keep the train moving in the same direction,
One of the fun things about production is that everybody's in the same office. So when you're developing, usually your writer is wherever they are, working from home or from their office, and you're doing phone calls, or now it's, everything is Zoom. And same thing when you're working with the studio, and even early days of planning with the director. But the great thing about the production office is that everybody's right there. So when you have an idea and the DP is like, well, what if we did this? You can walk into the production designer's office right there and say, non-COVID times, of course, but we'll get back there. And there are ways to kind of compensate for it, even with COVID. You just get this really great synergy of ideas. And so like as a producer, I want to be as present as possible, because you miss those moments of magic and conversation where these ideas spark. And then it can become, okay, great, let's run in and talk to the line producer about how we execute this idea and get ahead of it. Or like, let's go down the hall and look at what the board for the costume designer is and what the colors are that the actors are wearing on that day. You can just get all that feedback really, really quickly, which is just so much fun. One of the things that Jeanette kind of did in production on Songbird was they would just leave a Zoom channel open all day so that people could kind of pop in and have these on the fly conversations, even though we weren't all physically in the same place. And I thought that was just absolutely brilliant, because I missed that connection that you get from being in the office together.
Awesome. Can we just say that line producers are but like one of the most underappreciated jobs.
Oh yeah.
Like, can we, sure. and so on another
Thank
call, but for real. And, on another call, I feel like we need to figure out how to change that. Right. And especially because it is such an integral position, and folks that are coming through film school or not and are interested in film don't realize that this is a job that they can do that is important and then, really contributes. So that lack of transparency about who really gets shit done, which is Jeanette.
But also how creative Jeanette's job is too. Like there really is this impression, I think, in the industry that the line producer job is all logistics and not creative. Right. And I think that that's what Jeanette's really shown me over the years, is that if you aren't having creative conversations with your production team, you're really missing out.
Totally.
Well, that's one of the annoyances that I have with the PGA, because in order to get the PGA mark, they weigh the creative heavier than the production side. But I'm thinking to myself, you're like, hey, the production side is as creative, if not more, in certain circumstances, because I'm like, I have 2 popsicle sticks and a roll of duct tape, and I have to make that,
You have to make a boat.
Yes.
So this was the question I was going to ask, and it's so connected to everything you were both saying. This is a stereotype, but I'm going to say it. I think as women, we are aware of the benefits of leadership sharing. I heard somebody, there was like something, I think for the, we got to interview Monifa Bendelli, who's the COO of Time's Up now. And she was talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and what works so well with it is that it is a leader-full movement, as opposed to leader-less or decentralized. It's leader-full. And I do think that women and queer people tend to, I want to pat myself on the back, and we women and say, that's how we do things. But we're in an industry that is very hierarchical. And so especially on the development side, there's the I'm the person who brought this project, so I decide. But then at Pearl Street, it's, but Matt Damon is the person who got it done, so he decides. And I wonder how can a person navigate that as they go through, into physical production and even post, that there are both these clear hierarchies, but at the same time, as you both just said, what if you're, in the production office and a PA says, how about trying this? And it's one of these young whippersnappers that know all about, the internets or whatever, right? And you're like, holy shit. So how do you navigate that leadership?
You surround yourself with the people that you want to work with. I mean, in our company, there are 5 of us, and we all have had a career doing different things in the industry, but we all value each other and the piece of the puzzle that we bring to making projects and creating this company. So we created a company where we're all equal. And so because we made our microcosm like that, we looked for people who are like-minded and like-hearted to pair with and work with, who are going to treat us well and give us respect and give us, a piece of the project that is commiserative to what we've put into the project, and the same with them,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, sometimes that doesn't always exactly work out. Like sometimes you don't quite get to choose who your partners are and you do your best to choose the right partners. But sometimes, you're in a situation that shifts or for whatever reason, you gain a new partner that you don't have control over. I think it's a little bit of a different answer to your question, but I think being honest and upfront with everyone about, not trying to maneuver in the shadows, not trying to go around people, but being very forthright about what it is you're trying to achieve and what the goals are. And, if you're backing an idea, I'm backing this idea because it's coming from the director and it's important to the director. And so I'm doing talent management in that respect. Or going to the director and saying, the studio is not our enemy. The studio is trying to get your movie to a place where they want to release it. So let's really hear these notes and be very diligent about going through them and trying our best to see if there's a version of that note that can work. And I think again, there's this adversary between studios and filmmakers a lot of the time when the studio is there to get your movie released, and I think one of the things at Blumhouse that I really learned was, we didn't have necessarily a studio executive on every single project. We had kind of one person who was overseeing our account, who we'd check in, but they, at the pace that we were working, the studio really didn't keep up with our production schedule. And so it was more just kind of me saying, here's what we're doing. Here's like being proactive about like, just so that you guys know, we're going to cast this person. Let me know if there are any objections. But who I really talk to all the time were our marketing execs, because the marketing execs at the end of the day are going to decide your fate, and they're going to decide how the movie is pitched to the audience. And that will ultimately lead to whether or not the movie is successful. And being able to go back to the filmmakers and say, I know you have limited time and resources, but if we can get this cool thing that will inform the trailer, that's going to pay off down the road. And have it like, so I kind of see my job as like not necessarily kind of a mediator role. Like it's not about whose opinion wins or about like making sure that everybody's voice is heard, but it's kind of saying, okay, in this moment, what are our priorities at the end of the day to get the movie out into audiences and have it be successful and have it also be true to the integrity of what the project was supposed to do and the director's vision of it? And how do I make all those things fit together?
Jess, are there any things where, like, let's say creatively you would draw the line? Like, are there places where you can kind of say on a general level, I would not ask the filmmaker to do this thing in order to get their film made? Like,
yeah, I think so. Like, I think you get to a certain place where it's really been envisioned as a certain type of project. And then it does happen where you get kind of a weird note that really affects the core of what the movie is to its detriment. And those are the kind of things where I think you have to decide whether or not that's worth pursuing that financing option, or do you find another partner? I think it also has to do with the budget, right? Like if you are putting a project together and you've done your due diligence and you've really worked to get the budget down as low as you can, and you go to financiers and then they give you an even lower number as an offer for making that project, you have to look at it and say, is this still the project that I want to make if I'm making it for half the budget that was already squozed to begin with? At the end of the day, like, is that the best thing for the project, or do you pull back and wait and reassess and maybe there's another partner out there that's a better fit?
Yeah.
I think we could talk all day, but I think we need to do our martini shot.
Oh, shoot. Right.
I bet there are a bunch of questions out there in the land. And I think if you have questions, you should tweet us at Catch a Break Pod.
Yeah.
And we can have more conversation there. Okay. So our martini shot, as you know, is the last shot of the day. We like to do that as our parting words as part of this podcast. And I want to ask you a twofer. One is, what do you think, if you can narrow it down, is the most important part of your job? But also, what is the most important part of someone else's job that helps you do your job?
I would say the most important part of my job is matchmaking people in terms of their personalities. That to me is where the magic happens, when people can learn to work together well. What was the second part of the question?
Like, what's the most important thing Jess can do to help you do your job?
Okay, the most important thing that I feel that I would love for other people to do when I'm working with them is start the conversation early, be clear on what it is that they need and are looking for, and really listen. I think those are the things. If we can get into the dialogue of the conversation as early as possible, then we know what the expectations are and we know how to do the research, and we can attack the problem together.
That's great. Benjamin, are you ready with your martini shot?
So definitely I will say the most important thing I do is making sure that nobody has any excuse not to hire inclusively in every possible position in getting a story told. And I knew this already, and it's only been confirmed for me on this podcast that someone I admire greatly and know whose job is everything is the line producer. And thinking early enough about crew, and even for the inclusion writer, we know that we've got to be from the seedling stages, we have to say, here's a link to Cruvy and other databases where you're going to be able to hire people inclusively. So when you get there, you already have this, right? So not just around crew, but this has been enlightening to me to remind me about how creative line producers are and how important it is for them to be involved early on, to be thinking about strengthening the story by talking about what's practical to get made. So thank you for that, for that lesson.
Great. Jessica.
I think the most important thing that I can do is really to increase communication. And I think making sure that everyone is clearly conveying their vision and clearly conveying what's important to each other so that we all hear each other and really can, it's such a collaborative medium that we're in. And like you're saying, Fanchon, you never know where that great idea is going to come from. And so just being open to the right things, but also then still being true, as a director to your vision so that you don't get distracted by all the great ideas, fit in the ones that work and let the other ones kind of fall away, but be open to hearing everything. I think facilitating that is one of the most important things that I can do as a producer. And I think the best thing about working with Jeanette that I really look for, and I try to talk to other partners about, is transparency of, let me help you and let me lean on you to help me achieve what we want. And that goes back to that budget conversation of how we're allocating our resources, being able to go to Jeanette and say, look, I know dollar for dollar, this doesn't make sense, but here's why I really need to spend this money, or here's why I really need to hire this person. And, being in it together with honesty, I think is super important from all sides.
Okay, Fanchon Cox, Jessica Milanofi, Jeanette Volturno, thank you all so much.
This is awesome. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Great to be with you all. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Catch a Break. We'd like to thank our guests, Fanchon Cox, Jeanette Volturno, and Jessica Milanofi. And special thanks to Alternative Rentals for their support. Alternative Rentals is a premier cinema camera house that supplies digital camera equipment to high-profile scripted TV shows, feature films, and commercials across the nation. With offices both in Los Angeles and Atlanta, Alternative Rentals is committed to providing their clients a 5-star experience in all budget ranges. And also special thanks to Cruvy, reinventing the playing field in entertainment worldwide. Find them at Cruvy, CREWVIE.com. Please check out our website at catchabreakpodcast.com and follow us on all the social media. Catch a Break is produced in partnership with Cashlight Films, Rose Colored Pictures, and The Other 50%, and is edited by Lasta Drakovic. Our theme music, Mantra for a Struggling Artist, was composed by Andrew Jocelyn. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode where we talk about establishing the look with a director of photography, production designer, and costume designer.